Very good evening to all our viewers, and welcome to this week's edition of the agenda. My name is Toiwon Jabela, your host. Tonight we are very excited to have two very brilliant individuals on the show. That is Daisry Mathias. She is the Presidential Advisor on Youth and Youth Matters and Enterprise Development, as well as Inna Hengari, Honorable Inna Hengari. She is a member of Parliament for the Popular Democratic Movement, PDM. Thank you, Daisry, for being here. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, too.
Yeah, Honorable, thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We are talking about all matters youth today, and I'll start with you, Daisry. Let's start with the challenges that the youth are facing. One is perhaps the most important one is, or the biggest one is youth unemployment. There is a report that came out in July this year saying that by the end of 2021, youth unemployment in Namibia is expected to be at around 50%, 50.3%. I'm sure you are tracking down these developments. How do you think we got here in the first place?
Thanks, Toivo. So we can't look at unemployment in isolation.
Yeah.
It's not something that happens because of one inertia or another. It's really multifaceted, and fundamentally it has to do with two sectors.
Yeah.
The educational system and the economic drivers of growth.
Yeah.
Even in the best of times, our economy between 2012-2015 was growing on average 4.5%. Even in the best of times, the Namibian economy structurally is just not a mass employment creating economy.
Yeah.
And that is because the sectors that drive our growth are highly mechanized. It's mining, it's fisheries, and also to a large extent services. The sectors that used to employ a lot of the young people are agriculture, services, construction, and then fisheries and retail. That's where we used to create most of the jobs, and specifically agriculture for most of the young jobs.
Yeah.
So if we look over a 5-year period, what has been happening to the economy, we have to look at it across all the sectors.
Yeah.
From a global point of view, we had the commodity slowdown. That affected a lot of our trade, and that affected government's balance sheet. That affected our trade of balance, and it led government into a position where we had to do fiscal consolidation with Honorable Minister Kalish Letvine as Minister of Finance at the time. The fiscal consolidation strategy was good, but it was a double-edged sword. It reined in government expenditure, but it also affected our ability to really provide economic stimulus.
Yeah.
So construction went down, there was minimum fiscus stimulus, and also a lot of SMEs struggled to get paid during that time because the contracts were just not so in abundance.
Yeah.
At the same time, 2014, 15, 16, 17, the drought hit, protracted drought because of climate change. Not only Namibia, the sub-Saharan African region. That led to real job losses in agriculture. Our agricultural sector in between 2017 and 2018 shed 46,000 jobs.
Yeah.
That is young people in rural, remote areas working at a subsistence or a commercial agricultural level. And then fast forward now, we have new challenges like the pandemic.
Yeah.
And the pandemic in itself has created a lot of business closure, slowed down in economic activity, and those retrenchments have affected young people.
Yeah.
We saw what has happened to the tourism sector. The tourism sector and hospitality they sustain 150,000 jobs directly and indirectly. So the closures of our small tourism enterprises are job losses for our young people.
Yeah.
So I am very aware and following the figures. It has been a downwards trajectory on unemployment, from 30% broad to 33% youth to 36% youth, now 43% youth. We have the largest share. If you get into understanding who those unemployed young people are, they are, in terms of an absolute figure, we are talking about 349,000 Namibians who should be in the labor force, but they are not. 349,000. I don't think that is a problem that is insurmountable. You can know who they are, you know where they are. Of those 349,000, 43% of them are young people. They are typically female, they are typically in a rural area, and not in education, school, or training. Either nomadic community, a youth in conflict with the law, adolescent girls who had to drop out for one reason or another. Those are the drivers of youth unemployment, out of school youth.
I hear you. Thank you very much for that elaborate answer. Inna, is that your assessment yourself, or do you think there's more to why youth unemployment is so high in this country?
Yes, I think, thank you, Toyo, for the question once again. I think we have inherited quite a lot of inequality from our colonial history as well. Remember that before independence, a large portion of the unemployment, and especially youth unemployment, could be attributed to the war for independence, because it caused damage and despondence in the economy, and also just damaged or destroyed infrastructure. So I think 31 years of independence, however, of that of the period that we've had independence now, corruption, shortfalls in policy implementation, and also the education system, a skewed education system, if you ask me, are some of the largest factors or contributing factors to the youth unemployment crisis. And corruption, because in itself, of course, we said it's systemic, and also because for as long as we have people...
The president said it's not systemic.
Well, you can argue. I think for as long as we have individuals in public offices that steal money intended for development, that loot state resources intended for job creation, it will take us another 31 years to resolve this youth unemployment crisis. With the skewed education system, we have what we call a labor-intensive economy. Now, when we look at the 2018 labor survey, or the report of 2018, you'd understand that the people that are in offices now, the people that are employed now, their highest qualification is a grade 10. And then you have a situation where every year, because you produce graduates, you have a situation where majority of these graduates that you produce from institutions of higher learning are produced or graduate into the streets of unemployment. So yes, we are producing graduates, we are taking young people to school or through formal schooling, but we've not yet created an enabling environment where these young people can be absorbed. And we've also had, and I think this is an opinion of mine that and perhaps a discussion that I always have with my colleagues, is that we've not really encouraged young people to take up courses in the blue collar industry, and that is the biggest mistake that we've done over the years, because obviously there is this belief and understanding in society that I must be able to secure myself a job in the office, and if it's not in the office, it's not going to make me enough money. And that's the biggest mistake, because now looking at the economy, you realize that those that make it are those that have a degree, of course, but also have a skill to rely on or to lean on as it stands now. And so the fact that we have not improved the quality of education in TVETs also, and just the change of mindset and the general understanding of TVETs, because they are not dumping sites. They are institutions where the skills of young people can be harnessed to do better for themselves and to employ their peers in their communities.
Indeed. Daisry, Inna spoke about policies not being implemented as one of the challenges that may be that might be contributing to this. In July, you attended, if I remember correctly, the launch of the third National Youth Policy. What does it entail, especially in the context of the challenges that you listed earlier, to say this is now the policy that we can use as a tool to fight some of this?
So, in my view, Toivo, every minister for the government of the Republic of Namibia is a minister for youth.
Yeah.
And that is just because of the demographic profile of our young country. If you personify Namibia, she's 21 years old, she's black, and she's female. So to me, every minister is presiding over a young population and implementing policy for a young populace. So the role of the youth minister and the youth policy is really to provide anchorage. She's the anchor minister and must set the policy priority for her sector. But she's not the lone custodian of a youth policy. A youth policy is a horizontal policy. It must be executed across different sectors. Education, health, the economic sectors, everybody has got deliverables in order for us to collectively execute a youth policy. Similar to the growth at home strategy, it's a horizontal strategy.
Yeah.
With that said, the Minister of Youth's intent with this youth policy is to increase the focus of the work that government is doing with and for young people. It takes both an inward reflection on the role of the ministry, the workings of the ministry in creating platforms and engagement mechanisms that are structured for meaningful participation of young people. And then it takes an external focus on the role of other sectors, what we want to see happening in the different sectors. The policy was informed through a baseline study where the country assessed herself to say, what is the status of youth development in the country? It's a model that we have subscribed to through the Commonwealth Youth Index. And based on that, we measure ourselves on skills, on health, on economic inclusion, and on political participation. So the policy is basically anchored on those tenets of development, and we make a commitment to say, this is the type of participation we want to see economically, this is the level of education capacity building we want to drive towards, and these are the indicators of health and social well-being for young people. I agree with Inna that if we could execute the documents that we have, some of the challenges we face today would have probably not been as magnified. I was intimately involved in the drafting and the review and the formulation of the National Youth Policy, so I really understand the policy intent. I was intimately involved in the drafting of the Harambee Prosperity Plan, stakeholder consultations, and cascading down to the sectors. I fully appreciate the potential impact of these transformational projects. And if we can execute to the T, the HPP2, as one key policy of government, has the potential to create 42,000 jobs from the projects that are contained in it.
Yeah.
The question now is really the rate of project management and execution.
Indeed. As a member of parliament yourself, and as a young person yourself, the youngest elected member of parliament, if I may add, what is it that people like yourself in that house can do to sort of, make things better for the young people?
Part of our functions as members of parliament, of course, we understand that our functions are outlined in the Constitution under Article 63. But part of our functions is also to ensure that, or to remain vigilant and informed, and ensure that policies formulated, especially for young people, really speak to the issues of the day. They are relevant, applicable, and implementable. And now, I tend to agree and disagree with Daisry. You spoke about the minister not being the only custodian of the youth policy, and I 100% agree with that. But the biggest problem is that the rest of the ministries are not, it's not compulsory for them to carry that document, really. It's almost as, I was using this example the other day. One can literally say that is exactly what the Minister of Finance does. I remember that Parliament's function extends beyond just debate. We have an oversight function where we hold the executive accountable and where we approve the budget, the national budget. But what you would have seen, or what you would observe over the years, is that when the budget comes to Parliament, it is cast in stone. It is basically complete, and the debates that take place on the floor are just for formalities. And that is how I see youth mainstreaming in our country. I don't think that we have mandated and we have really emphasized the importance with the ministers of these different ministries to implement that policy. My second problem with the policy is that it's 13-paged. I mean, you're talking about almost 1 million young people. The 2018 National Labor Survey speaks about 800,000 young people in the country by 2018. And of that number, of course, as you know, 265,770 are unemployed. Now, are we saying that this 13-paged document is sufficient, is relevant to the issues of the day? I mean, I went through the document over recess, and my biggest problem is that in itself, it's a plan for another plan. It is not a straightforward policy document that you can see this is the direction in which we should go as young people of the country. I also don't agree with the statistics used. They're in very limited statistics from 2016, yet we have a labor survey report from 2018. So are we really saying that that document was I mean, if you go through the bibliography, the information is old information that I don't think is relevant even to this day. But there are critical issues that I really don't agree with. You look at countries like South Africa, Uganda, Kenya, and you look at their youth policies. First, upon opening the document, you understand, they give you a brief introduction of what a young person in South Africa looks like. Are they poor? Are they black? The age groups? And then they give you a broader understanding of the larger group, the population size of the youth in that country, the direction the country wants to take in terms of youth development and what it means to be a youth that is developed in South Africa, in Kenya, or Uganda.
We go for a quick break and then we return. We continue with the agenda with Daisry, Mathias, and Inna Hengari. Daisry, you said you were intimately involved in the formulation of this third national youth policy. How consultative are these processes usually? I'm talking about the fact that, just how involved are young people in initiatives meant for them?
Yeah, I think it's an important question. Before I get to it, Toivo, I want to lay Ina's concerns to rest in terms of the mainstreaming of the document and also in terms of some of the innovative aspects. The previous youth policies, this is the third one. It's it's not the quantity, it's the quality of the 13 pages. The primary objective of a policy is to pronounce the policy intent of the government. The minister and the ministry is the policy maker. This policy is then executed across different implementation agencies. Previously, our youth policies were very, very shallow in terms of policy intent. What this minister did is she didn't only provide a policy statement on the sector, she also extended the policy to provide the implementation action plan. It hasn't been done before. And the implementation action plan is actually the instrument that gives life to the policy. It is the one that gives the end state vision of what the youth minister would like to see in the sector after the 10-year period. This is the vehicle that is taken by the implementing agencies, whether it's the council, whether it's the service, and other youth agencies, in order for them to be held accountable on those targets. With regard to the meaningful participation of young people and whether the policy instrument is responsive to the contemporary issues that are affecting young people, I would want to believe that it is. Before there was even a review of the expiring policy, 2016 September, with my late comrade Mandela Kapere, may his soul rest in peace, still in his capacity as the executive chairperson of the Youth Council, initiated the first National Youth Development Seminar. And the Youth Development Seminar was really the precursor to the policy review.
Yeah.
That was where we brought all the young people. You know, the council is cascaded to the regional and constituency youth fora. That's where we brought the critical mass of representation from the length and the breadth of the country. And we summited here in Windhoek over a week, and we started to unpack thematically the issues of the lapsed youth policy and what a review and formulation process would look like.
Yeah.
Beyond that, there were a number of validation rounds. Some of the validations were done sectorally in the regions. I attended the Komas and the Omaheke. Then there was also a culmination, a final validation, which was done during the tenure of now Honorable Emma Kantema, while she was still the permanent secretary of the sector. So meaningful participation of young people means just that. It means that beyond consultation, beyond putting your thoughts on the table, is that that policy advice, that proposal is actually incorporated into the policy strategic documents as far as it is feasible. To a large extent, this document was informed by and approved by the young people that it's intended to serve.
Good. Now, in I just looked up the definition of youth in the Namibian context, and the oldest youth is 30 years old. If I look,
35.
Is it 35?
14 to 35.
Okay, because I saw 30 a while ago. But even worse now if it's 35, because I wanted to say that I can count probably on my one hand the number of young people in Parliament. Yourself, Utara Motu, Patience Masua, Minister Emma Teofeles. I can't remember others. I might miss others. But but in Parliament, in the
National Council.
Oh, she's in the National Council. Yeah.
Deputy Chief Whip.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, you are essentially operating in a very old space. So how difficult is it to be pushing a youth agenda in a predominantly old, age-dominated space like that?
I think you are right by saying I don't think young people are enough in that particular space. And that is perhaps a conversation for another day. But I truly believe that the party list system does not work in favor of young people in our country.
Yeah.
And you can only change that if you move to a federal system, that is why I said perhaps it's a conversation for another day. But it is very, very difficult to champion youth issues with a space dominated by the older generation, or what we call the elders in our communities. Because obviously everyone thinks that, well, it's youth unemployment, perhaps we could talk about it next year, or it's always going to be there. You know, we don't address some of the issues with the urgency they deserve. And perhaps most of the time we don't also look at issues, we don't always have the same perception or perspective as when we look at these different social issues or social ills. But I think one of the important things that we must always agree on as a young people, even beyond political lines, is the generational mission. We have many young people in our country that are not making a living, are just surviving basically, trying to survive the day for the next, but don't have a real chance at life. A chance where even those from, last week we had visits in the Tobias Hainyeko constituency, and we're having conversations with young people, and many of them are very educated. Young people who have qualifications from NIMT, young people who have qualifications from VTCs, young people who can do something with their hands. But because of the environment and the economic situation, there's almost no hope for them. But because we are here in these different political spaces, it is always my hope and my biggest aim and goal to ensure that I speak on behalf of those that cannot make it to Parliament, those whose stories I've heard of, and those whose life stories, in fact, I've seen myself. And so I think we can do much more and much better in terms of youth representation. And not just youth representation in the National Council or the National Assembly, but we want to see more young people take up mayoral positions, more young people leading corporate industries, companies, young people making decisions in the interest of fellow young people, to ensure that they carry the dreams of those that cannot be there. So I think the conversations about party lists and this federal and moving perhaps to a federal system that allows for all to contest with the element of equity is one that we should perhaps start looking at, because the thing with party list system is that it is very much limited unless you find yourself in a political party like mine, where young people in their capacities are identified from a very young age. You find it very difficult to position yourself in such a way that you are elected onto the list and through that list to Parliament. And that is why we have now young people brought to Parliament by the President. And I don't think it should be like that. Young people should be able to progress in their own political parties, even through the party system. Why is it that it doesn't work now? And it's because, of course, we believe in experience and comradeship and cater deployment and all these things. But we really need to start assessing and re-looking some of these systems that are in place, because I don't think they're in favor of young people, especially as it pertains to the youth representation in these different platforms.
Yeah. And Daisry, in your work as advisor on youth matters, I'm sure you engage a lot of people across all age groups. How much resistance do you come across from different generational groups saying you seem to be touching or crawling into our space as this age group, as this age group? Or is there a general acceptance generally that somehow the appetite to accommodate young people and their aspirations is there?
I think this is the crux of the matter. The political system, the generational mission, and this intergenerational leadership. You say only 5 people in the National Assembly. It's only 5 people because we are the majority, so it's not representative. But in my context, I count it a victory. Because in 2015, June, when I was appointed by the President, there was no youth leader that I could look to left or right who was within the structures and in these positions of decision making, either as a policy maker or as a lawmaker. 5 years later, I think it's a breakthrough that we have got, at least at the political interface. There's many young people that I do not want to dismiss just because they're not in political office. But I'm specifically speaking about those who are occupying political office. It's progress, and it's signs of progress. It's the first time in 3 decades of our independence that we have got a born free making laws for the country, that we have a born free in the executive, that we have got more women in the executive, in the cabinet. More than 50% of our ministers in cabinet today are women. And that we've got such a critical mass of young black females, policymakers, even from across the aisle. To me, that's a victory. And Honorable Patience Masua was in Kenya last week, and she made a statement to say, I don't want to be branded an anomaly. I don't want to be the youngest parliamentarian, because we're so many. Where's the critical mass? We should be in the majority within the chambers, and I agree with that. But I do think that there is a natural progression. And some of the things that Honorable Hengari is pointing out are true and correct. I work with the President, and I understand the complexity of decision making, and I see some of how these decisions are being made. The President's decision to appoint on his list the 2 born-free members that we have in Parliament is because of his intention and his consistency to create pathways for young people and to bring them into positions of decision making. That is a decision the president has taken not only as the president of the SWAPO party, but as the president of Namibia, as a nation builder. And he looks to say who is left out. Honorable Masua is from the Tswana community, from Omaheke. He wanted to bring that inclusion in. Honorable Emma Theophilis came in as a very young lawmaker into the executive. He wanted young people to be in the executive. Even opposition parties, Honorable Muniangwa was included into the executive because he's adamant about political inclusion. So the principle of inclusivity of the president is one that I think he has demonstrated through these intentional appointments. At the regional level, we see what he was able to do with the governors. But I do want to pause to reflect on the party system, because definitely the youth leagues of our political parties have got a legitimate pathway to parliament as youth leaders. They have a voting bloc, they campaign within the party, they go to Congress. And the president was on record, he made a statement to say that young people should vote for themselves. When you're in Congress and you have an opportunity in the pot to make it onto the list, when young people say that they are in the numbers, when they are mobilizing, why do we not vote for ourselves? So, and I think that is where the question of generational alignment or the mission comes into question. Do young politicians really support one another? I don't want now to reflect too much on the structural impediments. The system is imperfect, and I'm very familiar. I can only speak from a SWAPO party point of view, that the numbers that make it to Congress of young people are probably not at the number that they should be in order for them to make the dent that they should. But I believe a politician who is campaigning for leadership should be able to appeal across the board, to the young, to the old, to the women, to the elders council. And not only that a youth leader must be voted for by young people, but I do observe that we are not supporting each other to the extent that we should. And our leader is on record saying, young people, you say you're in the majority. Women, you say you're in the majority. Why are you not voting for each other to make it?
Indeed. We go for another break, and then we shall come back for the last stretch of the show. We continue with our conversation. Prior to the break, Daisry spoke about the improvement that has occurred over the past couple of years to bring more youth into structures like where you serve, Parliament. My question is, I said earlier that you are the youngest elected member of Parliament, elected. The colleagues of yours that Daisry mentioned were brought in by the president. Of course, it's very important for that mix to young people being brought in. But do we as a country want to have a system where organic growth of young people into bodies like that is limited? Why don't we perfect that system so that people can progress naturally themselves instead of, doing things that way? Where, in your case, for example, you are elected and people can, when you are talking, I can listen to you because you are elected. Then there's someone with an attitude that says, but you are not elected, who are you to say these things to me? Do you want a path cleared for young people to progress on their own, or a system where the president and other party members sort of appoint people like that?
Theo, I think it's important to understand that we cannot leave representation in the hands of a president, especially youth representation. We can't say that we can't have young people through a party list. So let us just hope and pray that whoever becomes president will appoint young people into parliament or into positions of power. That is a big mistake, because there is no guarantee for the young people that, in fact, they will be represented or called to serve in public office and so forth. So the youth representation block and the young people being represented in these different spaces should not be entirely reliant on the president calling them and appointing them onto their list. Because you also have an aspect where now, because last weekend we had a very interesting workshop and we had a conversation about this very topic, and even members of the ruling party were there, and they said, when we go to parliament, especially those of us who are not appointed by the president, we serve at the behest of the party. Why? Because we come through a party list system. So the president cannot wake up tomorrow and recall you from serving in that political space or that particular space. But the difference with that compared to being appointed is that the president can wake up any day and say, well, I'm pulling you out, I'm putting someone else in. And that is, you can't leave so much in the hands of just one person. Two, there is an element of accountability. And that is why in many countries, even in our country, you have young people appointed by the president, but will never stand up, even address a question to the Minister of Youth or the Minister of Finance about any issue. That's never happened. I've been in Parliament, this is my second year in Parliament. There is no youth leader from the ruling party or even a ruling party member, whether a backbencher with full voting rights or a backbencher with no voting rights. There is no ruling party member that has ever taken the floor, either to criticize a policy, to ask or pose a question to the ministers. And that is, in essence, what happens when we leave so much power to the president, because now he becomes the appointing authority. And the biggest problem with such a system is that even when you have conversations with these individuals, they would raise issues with you. But you go back and say, but what is the mandate of Parliament? What is the function of Parliament? What is your duty as a member of Parliament? In as much as, yes, you came to Parliament on a party ticket, but when do you perform your oversight functions? When do you hold the executive accountable? And those are very important functions and very important questions that we must perhaps begin to also answer. Because yes, you serve at the behest of the party, but there are people back home that you are representing that have voted for you to go represent them at Congress and that have brought you to Parliament, that you are accountable to, the Namibian people. And remember, once you become a member of Parliament, you are not just a representative for your political party. You represent all Namibians. Yes. All Namibians, cross-cutting, right? So I think it's very important that we understand we can never leave the fate of young people in the hands of a president. Look at Uganda. We're talking about President Museveni just a while ago and what is happening there. Look at, Zambia is actually a testimony for Africa. Even Malawi, where they have young people who are now serving in very, very important portfolios, but not because they were appointed, but because they were elected through a system, through the same system. So I think while we are here, while we are still having the system in place, it's important that we begin to apply the principle of equity so that young people can also be accommodated and not just be appointed into positions. We are appointing young people into positions, but they become almost like statues, just to sit there for ceremonial purposes, but don't speak in any way to youth issues. I mean, and that is why you even have the biggest crisis here. We are saying we have youth unemployment. Your Minister of Youth goes and says, well, young people should not be job seekers. They should be job creators. It's true, right? But the fact that you are saying that to young people who are faced with what I call a national crisis actually goes to show the divide between our public officials and the young people, or even people on the ground. Because if we don't build a communication bridge and a relationship between us as public officials or public office bearers and those that we represent, we'll always make such careless statements in the newspapers and media.
I hear you. Daisy, you wanted to say something back to
Toivo, I want to clarify the perceived illegitimacy between appointed and elected leaders.
Yeah.
Because a leader who is appointed by the president is operating on delegated authority. And the president is a legitimate representative of the single constituency of the Republic of Namibia.
Yes.
The president is directly elected and receives an overwhelming mandate in order for him to occupy that position.
Yes.
Therefore, a lawmaker serving in the National Assembly cannot be exempted from accountability to the party president and to the republic that elected the president.
Yeah.
So I want to dispel categorically that appointed leaders are somewhat less powerful or less accountable than an elected member. That president who appoints them, the appointing authority is elected. The second point I want to make is succession planning.
Yeah.
I agree with the principle that there must be sustainability. I agree with the assertion that young people must be able to occupy their positions through a process. But the question is there a leader in Namibia today who is disincentivizing young people from standing for political office? Is there a leader in Namibia today who has prohibited the participation of young people in politics today from a party and political point of view? The answer is no. I think these two systems must coexist. I think there are obvious flaws in the political party structures, in the ability of young people to transgress and to progress from wings into the mother body through to parliament.
Yeah.
Those problems must be fixed at a party electoral level, and the restructuring is necessary. I engage my youth leaders in the political wing. But at the same time, at the national level, I've said the president who presides over all appointing authorities must be intentional to create the space. And we should not discount it or take it for granted that when we have such a system, it's indicative that the other system is failing. While you fix the fundamentals, create opportunities for young people. Ever since I have been in public office, I'm on record to say there are not a lot of young, talented Namibians who are prepared to do public service. My peers that I've graduated with are earning 3 times the amount of money I earn because they're in the private sector as executives, they are serving on boards, the economic incentives are there. And sometimes public service is decentralized.
Yes.
So the point I'm trying to make is that young people must also become available to stand for political office. There is a scarcity of talent, but there's also genuine congestion within the progression of political party systems. Let us applaud the efforts of the appointing authority to create opportunities for young people.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that, to say that is there enough appetite among young people to be in offices like the ones you occupy? Maybe yours is a bit lucrative, but just to be, because to be in party politics actively, it's a huge sacrifice for individuals. You're putting your name on the chopping block. You could be outvoted. You could, the uncertainty is so much. But do we have, first and foremost, capacity? Because I remember last year, the Vice President of SWAPO, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, was campaigning just before the 2020 elections in the north, and she made a point to say, I look at the activities of young people, social media, the things that young people seem to occupy themselves with, and I wonder if we are ready as a generation of young people to actually succeed those that are currently there. Do we have capacity and appetite?
The answer is yes, but with a disclaimer. I think politics is for people who have conviction to serve. Not everybody should stand up and vie for power simply because they want to occupy a certain position in society. Politics is about conviction. So the core is not only that we should have appetite, but we want ethical leaders. We want leaders who are passionate, who are loyal, who will serve the country with fidelity and make sure that they are able to contribute to the betterment of our countrymen and women. I think that the confidence is growing. I think as professionals see the work of government, the political will, more and more and more have volunteered to take the cut, make the sacrifice, and cross over into public service. I can make references of respected industry leaders like James Munyupe, who's a youth, he's 36 years old. He was the chief executive of Alan Gray.
Yes.
He took a 79% salary cut to become the president's economic advisor. What compelled him? It's confidence in the leadership and the opportunity to drive change. We also know Madam Nangula Wanja has come from PwC to head a government agency to support the president in investment promotion. So the appetite is there, the capacity is growing. And I think one of the hallmarks of President Geingob is he has really been quite intentional to surround himself with people who are able to drive his vision and also who have the passion and the capacity to do so. Finally, Toivo, I think there are a lot of disincentives for young people in public office. And I think this is something that's not just peculiar to me. I think everybody has experienced it because it comes with the territory. But what the information age has done is it has made it quite challenging for young professionals to be in these spaces and to work honorably. Because of the type of attacks on the individual where you are branded to be part of a corrupt system simply because you are serving, not realizing that the one who has actually put skin in the game is the brave one who wants to go in and solve a problem from within. In the time that I work and engage young people, I can say it authoritatively that it's easier to be an armchair critic, to sit from outside and criticize the work of government, but to actually make the sacrifice to come inside the system and to discharge change from within the system. Many young people are not prepared to make that price. And the disincentive for those professionals outside is, why should I trade my peace of mind to be abused in public office, to be overworked, to be underpaid and unappreciated? And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we do that.
Indeed. We are drawing closer to the end of our conversation, but Inna, I have observed as an outsider that you make a lot of contributions in Parliament. You speak every other week, challenging elders on key decisions and policy decisions of Parliament and government, of course. I am just wondering, where does a young person like yourself draw that courage from in an environment like that, where not only are you young, but you are also in a minority insofar as your age group is concerned. Is there a challenge to you? Do you sometimes feel challenged to really do your work because of those two conditions that I mentioned?
No. But before I answer that, can I just touch on what Daisy said
Yes.
About being easy to criticize when you are outside than compared to when you are inside? I think there's a certain amount of criticism that one must always be ready to welcome, especially when you are in power.
Yes.
That is everywhere. It happens everywhere. But the fundamental point here is to listen to one another, because we are all Namibians, and when we are in public office, especially Parliament, I might bring up something that you are not comfortable to talk about because of the political party list system that we have, that I said is not beneficial to young people in our country. But when another person from a minority party raises an issue that is mutual to all of you and cross-cutting even beyond political lines, I think it's important that we support one another. Well, that support might not be in Parliament, it could be outside. But it's a very important aspect that we must also begin to learn and welcome. And by support, I don't mean people must go and post about each other on social media or whatnot, but to carry in essence those arguments even into the executive that you serve, even into the different spaces that you are appointed from. But the reality is, when you are in a ruling party and you come from the governing party, basically, of that country, criticism will always be there, but we must be united by being reminded that we belong to one country and we are one people. Your question was, where do I draw the inspiration? When you decide to run for public office, I think there is a level of, or an amount of peace that you let go, or you are ready to forego. And that is because you understand that you no longer carry your interests when you're standing in Parliament or whatever position. You understand that the burdens that you carry and the issues that you speak of are not just issues that touch you directly, but are issues that affect other young people or just people in general. And I also want to address the issue of, we are misguided when we think that young people should only speak to youth issues or only limit themselves to that particular block. I always strive to be a young person that speaks on everything. So if it's an economy, if there's a debate on the budget, I must know what it means for young people. When young people say we want a youth budget, or a budget that speaks to youth issues, right? I must understand when it comes to gender. I must also understand when we speak about foreign affairs, because that is basically my area of expertise anyways. I'm a graduate of international relations. I'm reading towards my master's now. But I think it's very important that young people equip themselves with so much knowledge that you are not just limited to speaking on youth issues, on youth employment only. But when these other important issues also come up, you must be able to prove yourself knowledgeable and also contribute from an informed point of view, and not just go there and chew cabbage.
Chew cabbage.
Yeah.
Daisry, you have 30 seconds to wrap up this conversation. Any last words?
Toivo, only to reflect on the generational mission. I think in my work, I call it advancing a common youth agenda. I serve president as advisor for all young people of the country. I don't look at party colors. I don't look at majority. I look at inclusivity and really upholding those principles. And what the colleague has said is true. In that kind of engagement, the enduring principle is listening to one another, making sure that you can overcome and define a generational mission. In my own words, I think that the young people of Namibia have united and have understood our generational mission. We understand poverty is what we're fighting. We understand inequality is what we're fighting. We also understand that as young people, we have a common interest to make sure that we are included into certain structures. And that support, implicit or explicit, is there. The work that I'm doing to advance youth development in the Office of the President is the work that my colleague is advancing in Parliament. We may come from different sides, but I believe it is these small individual impacts that will make the collective difference.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Daisry, for coming.
Thank you for having me,
yeah.
Toivo.
Ina, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, that is the end of this very engaging conversation. We hope to have the two ladies once again, who knows when in the future, but it was a beautiful conversation from my perspective. Thank you for watching and good night.
Make sure you catch Africa Good Morning every weekday from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. with a rerun from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. hosted by Aina Raizakweyo and myself, Ashwin Dedi, as we bring you all the news you need to know happening in the SADC region and beyond.